and welcome back to the Detours in Music podcast. My name is Laura Ruppel. This is Season 4, Episode 7, an interview with Ilya Finkelshteyn, the principal cellist of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. I hope you enjoy.
My name is Ilya Finkelshteyn. I am a principal cellist of Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. Also principal cellist of mostly Mozart Festival Orchestra for the past, I think, 20 years. Former principal cellist of Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and I'm also an adjunct assistant professor at Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music.
And when did you start here in Cincinnati?
September 14th, 2009.
When did you get your start in music?
Officially, I started playing piano first. I think I was about 5 years old. My parents thought that I started singing before I started speaking, and I was singing in tune, so they kind of figured that I had some musical talent. And my brother, who is a bass player, he's a principal bass in Raleigh, North Carolina Symphony Orchestra. He was 8 years older than me, and he also started on the piano, but always wanted to play a string instrument. But because he came to it kind of late, they put him on the bass, and so I think he kind of made me follow his unofficial dream. So I started playing the cello. I was 6 years old is when I first started taking lessons.
Was having your brother as a musician kind of always the help motivate both of you, I think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, I always looked up to him. I still do. I remember he would practice with me very often, as I got a little older, my 12th, I was 12 or 13. So at that time, he was already playing for Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra. No, it was actually, so when I started a school, what was called a special music school in St. Petersburg, it's pre-college to the Conservatory there. He was in his last year of the school. And so from basically the third grade, my brother would be always up in the Conservatory. And then 5 years later, he became a member of the Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra. And so, I would always look up to him, go to concerts. He would always listen to me, come to my concerts, and so on. So, yeah, absolutely.
I heard him play Pulcinella I was at Eastern Music Festival a few years ago.
Oh, right.
Yeah. It's like they do look similar.
They do. They do.
When was there a realization for you that music was something you were going to pursue, or maybe it just always was there?
It was always there, but because the school that I entered, the special music school, it was basically a school of professional development. And the Soviet Union, at the time it was called Soviet Union, had such schools. So there were either language schools, people would learn English, German, French, or math schools or music schools. And so each capital of a Soviet Republic would have one of these special schools. And then Moscow had one, and St. Petersburg, Leningrad at the time had one. And so once you entered, the idea was that we would become professional musicians. And so I kind of never really wandered off the path, except for the time when we immigrated to the United States. And I had we had about a year break, because that's how long it took to immigrate, and even a little bit longer. And so when we came to the United States, I came with my brother's family at the time. We had a long conversation. He basically said to me, now it's the time where you can decide whichever way you want to go. And I didn't see myself doing anything else. I spent, there was so much time and resources invested into learning how to play the cello and everything else. So it didn't seem like there would be another path.
Right, right. How old were you when you came to the States?
18 years old.
Okay.
So I left Soviet Union when I was 17, and I came to United States when I was 18.
And did you attend school all in America then? For
Yes.
college? Mm-hmm.
For college, yeah. I started at the University of Minnesota. That's where we immigrated first. Actually went to just the end of the high school there. We had to learn language and figure out, just learn the American culture.
Mm-hmm.
So started at the University of Minnesota, and I was there for a year, and then I transferred to Juilliard, and that's where I stayed until the end for 6 years.
That's awesome. Was there anything that you struggled with during your schooling here?
At first, the language, of course, was a little bit difficult, but at that time when I was 18, 19, learning another language is still easier than
Mm-hmm.
if I were much older. So little by little, that became easier. The level of competition and competitiveness at Juilliard actually did not surprise me, because that's about the level that I felt we had growing up in Russia. And I know a lot of people struggled with it
Mm-hmm.
at Juilliard, coming from smaller cities, or in that I did not really feel pressure or difficulty. What was difficult is that my teacher was very demanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the only thing that it was difficult at first, because when I started studying with him, I don't know if you want to hear this, but it's a story in itself. The very first time I met him, when I heard him play the cello, and I heard him extract most magnificent sound I've ever heard in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Still, that's the greatest sound I've ever heard. It never occurred to me to do anything else but what he would ask me to do, to change. And he actually, as we started with him, he basically changed everything. My approach to the instrument, how I set, how I held the bow, my left hand, my vibrato. That took probably at least 2 years, and where I felt that I could not play more than one note at a time without thinking about what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But once I heard him play, there was never a question in my mind that that's the only way to do it for me, anyhow. Right. And then in the end, I realized that he didn't actually change my sound, my chord
mm-hmm.
sound. He just added to it and made it more varied, and made it more kind of open to possibilities of different things. So that's the part that was difficult,
mm-hmm.
Because it took every bit of discipline and energy, and I'm not super disciplined to begin with. So, but the way he taught was very different from all the other teachers I've ever encountered, in that when I met him, he was 80 years old.
Mm.
His name was Harvey Shapiro, just so. And so he didn't travel much anymore. He did have concerts, but they were either very local or,
mm-hmm.
In small numbers. So his way of teaching was that we would have one scheduled lesson per week, which was half an hour, which seems like, oh, that's nothing, mm-hmm. But the intensity with which he taught and the amount of information that was given, I don't know if anybody could handle half an hour. I think usually 20 minutes, and that kids would just shut down because it's just too much.
Yeah.
And then he would say, rather than spending a week on your practice from figuring out what I said, why don't you come at night and just play for 5 minutes? And he was available every day of the week.
Mm.
So for first, I don't know, probably throughout my undergrad, I would play for him anywhere from 5 to 8 times a week. And I think,
system.
yeah, and I don't know if there's a possibility to do anything like that. Like, I would not be able to offer my students such freedom simply because I don't have the time between the orchestra and all the other things that I'm doing. But for me at that time it was an incredible resource. And I think, and I used it. Now, he gave that opportunity to every student that studied with him, and not everybody kind of went along and decided to play for him, because it was not easy to study with him. He was very demanding. I remember I played Brahms F major sonata, and for 2 weeks, which is once every day, I played for him every day. The only thing I played for him were the first 2 notes.
Yeah.
Ta-da, that's all. And no, ta-da. But he would explain what he wanted, but it was so much to do within 2 notes that it took me 2 weeks to move on to the next note. I think I'm now close to be able to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the hardest thing with studying with a teacher is kind of giving up your security of how you feel most comfortable, what you're used to, and really buying in, or like drinking the Kool-Aid to just trust them and let everything take shape. But it can take a lot of time and a lot of trust.
And a lot of trust, yeah. But also, because I teach a lot now, in summers and at UC and other places, I give master classes in different locations in the United States and so on, and the world, and I see a lot of very talented kids, extremely talented people, and I try to realize, what is it that makes a teacher really good? What is that? And I think there's not much a teacher can do if I'm talking strictly about music teachers, of course, unless the student hears the difference.
Right.
So to open up the ears of the student to a new possibility, I think that's the greatest gift that a teacher can have, because otherwise it's not going to work, and the kids are going to resist and so on. But once the ears are open, then I think the road to an open mind is open as well. And so, and that's where my teacher, I think, was exceedingly amazing, is where I thought he opened up my ears. Now, I obviously was looking for something. I wasn't there to be pampered and said that, oh, you're so great. Look, I have to tell you that when I came there, I was kind of like, I was doing pretty well. You would think that I had a little career going in Russia. I had concerts. I came to Juilliard from the summer in Aspen, where I won concerto competition, so I felt like I'm on the top of my game, as you can be in 19, 20. And then all of a sudden come smack against a total change where you think, well, that's pretty good. But once I heard him play and I heard him do what he did on the instrument, there was not once did I question in my mind even. It was frustrating, but not because of what he was offering, but because I couldn't do it as fast as I thought I would,
Right. I think that's a very good experience, both to have a teacher so available to you, because that can motivate how you teach or how you ideally could teach given schedule. But I think it's nice to have that mentorship of trust and knowing that they're going to be there for you and tell you the truth.
I think that's the most important thing, is that he he was very tough. He would tell me if it didn't sound good, and he told me that often. Mm-hmm. But it was always separated from not you don't sound good, but it doesn't sound good. So right. But when it did sound good, he would also tell me. Mm-hmm. So you would absolutely know
if you got it.
Yeah, if you got it. So after graduating, I kept playing for him as much as I could. So I got a job in St. Louis Symphony out of school. And it was a little more difficult to fly back and forth to New York and take lessons, mm-hmm. which I tried anyway, but it was a little less often. But when then I moved to Baltimore, I played for him almost every week or 2 weeks. Wow. I would go to New York and kept playing for him, and which I thought was probably for me, was the most fruitful.
Yeah.
Because things that he was talking about, especially toward the end of his life, were so detailed and such refined things that I never met or heard it from anybody else mm-hmm. in my profession, and not only technical things or problem solving things, but also phrasing, sound. He passed away at the age of he was almost 97 years old, and he played almost until the very end.
Wow.
And he never lost the sense of hearing. And he had the most incredible ears, attuned to most refined details of mm-hmm. sound, tone, and variation of it.
Wow. That's a beautiful relationship that you had. And of course, credit to you for continuing to go back.
Once you figure out that there's an invaluable well of mm-hmm. knowledge, mm-hmm. not to go back is kind of silly,
right?
But that it's not going to be there forever,
right?
So, funny anecdote is when he passed away for a long time, I was incredibly upset at him mm-hmm. for passing away, because I thought just at the end, I started to understand.
Right.
What he was talking about. And I said, just as I started to understand it, he said goodbye,
Yeah.
So.
When you were growing up, you always thought of being a professional musician. Did that only look to you like being in an orchestra?
No, because I absolutely love chamber music. And I had a quartet growing up, and we did some international competitions, and we were fairly successful and had concerts. I had some solo gigs, concertos, and so on. So now, obviously, it's a little bit of a different time, and with having internet and connection to the whole world, and instant connection.
Right.
Things are slightly different. So, but what I realized fairly early in school, mm-hmm. I'm talking about Juilliard, is that just concentrating on one thing would probably be limiting. Because what happens if that doesn't go the way I plan? What if my career doesn't go toward orchestra or toward playing in a quartet or a trio and so on, and then you kind of left behind. So I thought that the most important thing is my concentration should be on the level of playing that I can present. And then hopefully it would fit a variety of different things. And my final graduation jury, or at UC, they call it boards. Mm-hmm. After I played, my teacher got in a fairly heated argument with another cello teacher whose name was Aldo Periso. Very famous gentleman, had a beautiful Strat cello that used to belong to Manuel Foreman. Aldo was a great Brazilian soloist. And they got in a very heated argument while I was standing there after the jury was over. And Paris was saying, oh, you absolutely have to be a soloist. Do anything you need to do to become a soloist. I don't care if you go deliver mail or go work at Starbucks. You have to be a soloist. And my teacher said, Elder, no, he has to make money. He has to have an address. And basically, my teacher was absolutely certain that in order to make a living as a musician, you have to have an address. So for him, having an address meant belonging to an institution. Now, it doesn't, conservatory or an orchestra, but at least something, the quartet, it's a residency somewhere, just so there's a base.
Right.
And so I started taking orchestra auditions when I was still at Juilliard. I think my third year bachelor's is when I took my first audition. I started studying orchestra excerpts privately. And there was an audition for New York Philharmonic. And from Juilliard, just across the street, so you don't spend any money. And so I took the audition, and the audition was, I forgot which month. And they didn't have a second round. So from first round, you go straight to the finals. And all of a sudden, I ended up in the finals, my first audition, and there were only 3 finalists for 2 jobs.
At New York Phil. Oh my God.
Yeah. So, and I think the finals were not going to happen for a while, like 3 or 4 months. And for 4 months, every day, I would think how I would spend all the money that I would make being in New York Philharmonic.
Yeah.
Especially thinking that there are 2 jobs for 3 openings. And I kept practicing, and then the finals happened. And I thought, well, okay, so I either get the job or I don't get the job. But there was a third possibility that I did not expect, which was nobody got the job. And it kind of sobered me up a little bit, So my first audition in orchestra was, I was successful, and it was fairly successful. And so it probably, I don't know, it did not have a bitter taste after a first unsuccessful audition. So I figured, okay, so if I make finals in New York Phil, that means I could probably do it. Right. I have a possibility of doing something. And so, and then in the end of the school, I took several more auditions during school. And when I was in my last year of master's at Juilliard, I won St. Louis Symphony Orchestra section audition. And it was, it seemed so improbable to have a job right out of school, not to have a gap year or to have that. When I called my mother, I called my parents from Powell Hall. They had a payphone in the lobby, and I called them long distance because they lived in Minnesota. My mom said, "Oh, you're lying," and she hung up on me. So I had to call back. I said, "No, it's true." But what I always thought, that if I were a principal in any orchestra somewhere, they would probably give me the most opportunities to do a variety of different things.
Right.
So I could probably play a solo, I could play chamber music, I could teach, and play in the orchestra, obviously, because I still think that the orchestra allows the widest repertoire one could have.
Right.
So I never thought that I would end up in Cincinnati. So you never know where you're going to end up. And I think the only constant was that I kept practicing and having my cello skills.
Right.
Having a cello as the constant throughout. So whatever would have happened, it would still probably involve the cello, barring any injuries or anything like that.
Right. What is some advice you tell either your students or younger players you're mentoring who aren't having that instant lineup of job after graduation?
It's a very difficult position to be in because, compared to where I graduated and they're graduating, the cost of school is drastically different, and they're under even bigger pressure to get a job or work, to maybe pay off school loans and so on, if they had them. I also think that a lot of younger kids have unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
So I've been now on both sides of the audition screen, so playing audition and listening to auditions. And there's so many people auditioning. Last audition, we had over 240 applicants for cello position. And they come from all over the world, literally. The auditions are tough, and I don't know. I think trying to be prepared as much as you can should not be underestimated.
Right.
I often feel that kids often go to audition to gain an experience of how it's going to be. And I really am against that kind of experience, because if you're going to audition, there should be only one reason, which win the job. To win, to get a job. And so then, because right away, if you have a wrong idea or wrong attitude, the preparation is going to be different, and your attitude is going to be different. So I try to prepare them for what it's like and what you need to advance or what you need to do well in the audition. They're brutal, now in schools we have, I'm strictly speaking about string instruments, we have some kind of preparatory programs for auditions. So like an orchestra rep class. I teach one at UC, and I try to incorporate bits of actual audition preparation to it, not just learning orchestra repertoire. Because very often they don't know what to expect. They don't know what it's like. And what we learn is to prepare a recital, prepare a concerto, which is fantastic, and you should be able to do it. But an orchestra audition, especially in the first couple of rounds, is completely not that type of experience.
Right.
There's so many people that we have to listen to in one day, and we have to make sure that we get through all of them. So the audition then becomes, 3-minute long, 4-minute long. And so when people prepare to play a recital, I compare that to, a marathon. And all of a sudden, an orchestra audition is not a marathon. It's a sprint. It's a 60-meter all-out sprint. And so that's a different skill that I think is very important to practice. How to start great, how to be mentally tough and not to get anything else, any thoughts or any variety of circumstances interfere with your focus and concentration. So, but I also think that's a valuable and important skill to have whenever we play a recital or a concerto and so on, just to be able to start right away and be there from a first moment. I think that's important. So what I tell them is all of that, plus if you do very well, that's great. But if you don't, that doesn't mean you're terrible. You're no better after winning audition than you were the day before winning the audition. So nothing changed. You still have to work. You still have to do everything you do. And also, the most important thing is what I learned also is winning an audition does not mean winning the job.
Right.
Because there's still tenure process. And after tenure process, you still have to perform at your best and perform great. So it keeps on going all the time. It's never a letdown.
Right. You've never fully achieved it in music.
No, you never fully achieved it. And, your last concert may be great, and
another one.
And there's another one, just like, I'm sure you know how many concerts we play per week now. We have often at least 2 programs a week, maybe 3.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 concerts, and if you include chamber music or any kind of outreach activities, we do 3, 4, sometimes 5. A couple of weeks ago, I think I had 6 concerts in 8 days, and I think 3 or 4 different programs.
Wow.
So there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of demand, and so so it's never, oh, you've made it.
Yeah.
A wonderful phrase by Arthur Rubinstein said that if I don't practice for 1 day, I know it. If I don't practice 2 days, my friends know it. If I practice 3 days, my audience knows it.
My audience.
Then it takes twice as long to get back.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't practice for 3 days, it probably takes a week to get back to where you were. So you're now a week behind.
Right.
So,
did your Cincinnati audition feel different in any way?
In the hall that was much larger. Usually, I did very well if there was an audition right before or fairly close to the audition. And so I played an audition for Cleveland Orchestra just a couple of months before, so I was in good shape. And I came in, and what was different is that I felt incredibly comfortable on stage. I looked out in the hall, and I kind of was looking, I was like, wow, that's beautiful. This hall is incredible. And then when I started playing, the sound was, it didn't seem difficult for me to understand. I heard myself, I heard the sound coming back. I was comfortable doing what I was doing. So it's not like it was super different than any other audition, but very often we respond to what it sounds like on stage. Right. And I remember some auditions are very comfortable when you hear yourself and the sound is complementary, and then some stage you hear every little noise and that is really difficult. Now, it doesn't mean that that's how it sounds out in the hall, but it certainly is very difficult for the player. And so I think that our stage is actually quite nice.
Right.
So, especially now, but even then, although the hall was carnivorous, I mean, it was 3,400 seats.
Yeah.
So it felt like I couldn't even see the back wall. It was so far. But it never felt huge sound-wise, so it felt like I could play comfortably.
Question I had has to do with your cello. I'd love to hear about the history it has and what you love about it.
So the cello that I use now is a Domenica Montagnana cello made in Venice in 1730, and it was bought in 2018 for the orchestra used by the Hale Foundation here, and with the hopes that it will belong to the orchestra and will stay here in perpetuity, and whoever will, I guess, be a principal after I leave will use this instrument. And I have the huge privilege of playing it, which I absolutely love, and I'm extremely grateful and honored to do it. It happened so that I had been looking for a great instrument for many, many years. I have a wonderful cello of my own. It's made by Giovanni Grancino in 1700 in Milan, and it's a lovely sound. That's the instrument I won the Cincinnati audition on. But I've always looked for something, not to say more special, but and different qualities in the sound and different kind of presentation. And so I tried many instruments and I brought them here and I played that for our music directors, including Pavel Yarvi and Louis Langray. And so, and nothing ever clicked. And I've had some great cellists that I tried and it just didn't work. And so one day in March of 2018, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was then a concertmaster of St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. It was on a Friday night, I remember, and late, like at 11 p.m. He said, there's an amazing cello here for sale that you should take a look at. And we talked about it, and I've heard about that cello before, that it was there. And then the morning after, at 8 a.m, I got a call from a luthier friend of mine, literally, that was within 8 hours, who was showing that instrument in San Francisco. And he said, look, son, this is one of the greatest cellos I've ever seen or heard or read. And at the time, I was playing on Strand cello. And so I went to, after a concert on Saturday night, I went to see Louis Langray, and Jonathan Martin was there. The concert said, yeah, I'm playing the Strad, but I just got a call that this instrument is there. What should I do? And they both said, just go try it. And so it happened to be that instrument was literally 3 miles away from my parents' house in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so I flew the next day. I flew on Sunday, stayed with my parents, which is a bonus.
Yeah.
And I went in and I played on the cello for about, 5-6 hours. And my friend from Minnesota, from St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, who's also a concertmaster of mostly Mozart Festival Orchestra, he came in and we fiddled with the sound. We tried this and we tried that, and it sounded great, no matter what you tried to do. It was, it had so much potential and so many qualities that I just kind of it blew my mind. And to make the story short, it was difficult to get the cello to Cincinnati to try it, but it was done. And my luthier friend, his name is Christoph Landon, he had to fly from Geneva to New York, to Minnesota, to Cincinnati, back to New York, back to Geneva in 32 hours.
Oh my gosh.
To get the cello here. And once the cello was here, never left Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Because it's really an amazing thing to me that our management, the people on the board, our leadership recognized what a great instrument it was and basically agreed that it should stay in Cincinnati. And it all happened within 3 days.
Wow.
We had a blind test on stage. Our stagehand put up a screen. And so I played on a Strad first, which is, also a wonderful cello.
Also great.
Also great cello. And then I played the Montagnana, and then I heard it like a collective groan behind the screen. And then they asked me to play something else, and I played something else. And then Jonathan Martin was there. He asked me to play some Bach. And then there was a lady from the board, and she asked me to play Kol Nidre, and I started playing on the Montagnana, and she started crying, not seeing the instrument.
Yeah.
It's all behind the screen. And so, so since then, it's been here with me, pretty much every day. The instrument has an interesting history. It has a name. It's named Farina, after a family in Venice that owned it for about 90 years, from 1790 to about 1880. It's a family that was very famous in perfume business in Venice. And then the business dried up. They moved to Germany, moved to Cologne. And they liked it so much, and the business was doing so well, they named their perfume Eau de Cologne, which is a fairly famous name now, any kind of perfume. The waters of Cologne. And it's still, that perfume is still around. You could still find it here. And then the cello was for sale. It was at the Hills in London. They said that Alfred Piatti, which is a very famous cellist, played on it and sometime and recommended it very much. And then a benefactor who was anonymous bought it for use of May Muckle, who was probably a premier British lady cellist of the time. He had it for 70 years.
Wow.
She played on it in a trio with Rebecca Clark.
Okay.
That trio. They played all over the world, South Africa, South America. She had a debut in Town Hall in New York in 1948, and the review said that it had a searing sound. There's even a YouTube of her playing on this cello from 1915.
Wow.
Which I think is pretty remarkable, where I recognize the quality of the instrument.
Yeah.
So, and then it was bought by a cellist in New York Philharmonic for about 30 years. He had it. And then it was bought by a principal cellist of Minnesota Orchestra. And he 30 years. And once he passed, his family, his estate decided to sell it. And I got to see it literally a week after it was offered for sale. And we found out that there were a list of people coming to see the instrument, a list of people from Europe, including some very famous soloists, which I think also played in a decision
of speeding up your process.
Speeding up the decision, yeah. So, yeah.
That's pretty remarkable.
It is. It is a remarkable instrument. You know, it's the first time I play cello, which I feel like has no limits. It does not have a limit to the lower end, the middle register, the upper end, the power, the colors. All the limits are that would come from me, not from the instrument, which I find it really is the first time. And there are some instruments that are amazing, but they kind of impose their personality on the player. Right. Like a Strad often has a specific sound of its own, which is a remarkable sound, but it refuses to do anything else. It can only do one, that, which is amazing. But where this cello is a bit of a chameleon, it basically can mold to whatever you do, and it does it tenfold. So
that's awesome. I mean, I've heard you play, orchestra and solo and chamber music, and it's always the right color. So I'm sure some instruments can't do all of that as well. I'm sure. And the other thing is, I think it fits the way I draw sound. The instrument. It's a very large body instrument, like physically, it's a big cello. And so it requires an extra, I don't know. I find that's like a lawnmower, where you have to yank it to start. And that's always kind of like that. You have to be physical in the way you draw the sound, not in any kind of force, but it doesn't sound on its own. Right. But somehow it fit the way I draw a sound. So that's awesome. What are some of your goals right now with music making or teaching? Obviously the symphony keeps you busy, and I know you do a lot of outreach concerts and chamber music. So summers are usually very busy. I go to New York and do a few other festivals. I teach at National Orchestra Institute up in Maryland. This summer, I've been doing that for a long time. There's a chamber music festival up in Wyoming toward the end of August, and 5 weeks in New York with mostly Mozart Festival. And then there are some chamber music concerts. There's a few solo for next year. I tried to figure out a way how to possibly record a CD. And the reason for the CD, I think that this cello has to be recorded because it's such an incredible
opportunity to have it, so it'd be silly not to
Mm-hmm.
do something special with it. But otherwise, our season is so busy.
Mm-hmm.
It's so full with everything. So just looking at whatever is happening and being ready with all the repertoire and all the little incidental orchestral solos.
Mm-hmm.
And everything else. And I go with whatever my students need. So if they're preparing for a competition or for a concerto or for a recital or for graduation boards or
Right.
for an audition in an orchestra. So I'm
Always busy.
yeah, it seems like never a day off.
Yes. One of my last questions is, what are some of your interests outside of music?
I love golf.
Yeah, I see the hat.
Yeah. Well, today is the Masters Sunday, so I'm representing a place where I'd like to be someday. I love golf, partially because it's a great game and you spend time outside, but also I find a lot of similarities to music.
Mm-hmm.
That there is some repetition, but there's also an absolute freedom, because you never know what's going to happen on a golf course with the weather, wind, with how things are. So that is an incredible tool, I feel, because just like playing auditions in golf, you have to be really focused for one moment of hitting the ball, of making a shot. So that is one thing. I used to play a lot of billiards and table tennis competitively.
Yeah, that's awesome.
When I was young, we played hockey and soccer. So I was like not a jock really, but did a lot of sports. When we travel, we try to visit every museum we can. So yeah, unfortunately, there's not that much free time to do all of the things that I described.
I really appreciated learning more about your story, and it's definitely an inspirational one, and it seems like you've had a happy career in music.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no other way to describe it. I'm very happy to be where I am. I'm appreciative of where I am. Cincinnati, jewel that many people don't know about. From the cultural support the community offers, from the traditions of culture in Cincinnati, I think it's one of the greatest places to live. And the orchestra is terrific, and the music hall in itself is probably one of the greatest halls in the United States. So to be there every day and to call it my office it's a remarkable thing.
I really enjoyed speaking with Ilya for that episode. There are two concepts he mentioned that really stuck out to me. One being the fact that winning audition doesn't make you actually better than you were the day before or any worse the day after, depending on the result. It's so subjective. The other thing that stuck out to me was this internal confidence that was instilled in him at a young age that this career could always work out. And I think that also proves that mindset and that trust in yourself. And we can be so stressed and overwhelmed by the fear of not getting a job, but if you just put faith in and say, no, it's going to happen, there's no other option, then likely that will help put things into your favor. As always, thank you for listening to the podcast, and keep up with us on social media and listen to the next one. Thanks.